Welcome, and on behalf of INCOMPAS, thank you for joining us for today's webinar session. During our session today, Mike Reed, Senior Risk Advisor with UNITEL, and Tom Glover, Chief Revenue Officer with Responsive Technology Partners, will discuss today's topic, what you need to know about cybersecurity and risk management. The session will also provide an overview of the cyber risks currently facing businesses and how to reduce your company's risk. Please feel free to submit questions throughout the presentation today using the question and answer feature on the Zoom platform, and they'll be happy to take your questions. To those attending, thank you again for taking the time to join us today as we discuss this very important topic. Mike and Tom, thank you for putting the program together, and with that, I will now turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Julia, and on behalf of UNITEL and Tom, and with Responsive Technology Partners, we're excited to be part of the webinar series that INCOMPAS puts on. And today, I think with cybersecurity and what we want to speak to today, I think open conversations around the challenges that face our companies every day, those who we insure, our infrastructure. The more collaboration we have around this topic, I think betters the whole industry, and best practices around how to move forward. What we want to focus on today, before I introduce Tom, Responsive Technology Partners, we really want to speak to the current environment, what we're seeing in the cyberspace, company best practices, and then look to the 1-3 year considerations. I think in talking to Julia, as we discussed, what would be relevant to the group, really think we're past, what is cyber insurance, what is cybersecurity, why do you need it? I think we really need to look to kind of what the criticals are today, and knowing what we've been through the past couple of years, and we'll recap some of that, what we need to, from a standpoint of investment of capital, internally from a risk standpoint, what it looks like in the insurance world as you look to secure insurance for contractual reasons, what that looks like, and how we move forward. Our goals today, as we move through this discussion, is to better understand the insurance carrier underwriting request. I know in talking to many of the associations that we belong to and the committees that we're on, it's become very in-depth as to the questions that are being asked, the mitigations, the controls that need to be in place. Very different today than what it was 2-3 years ago. So we're going to speak to kind of current status of what you need to be thinking about, what the insurance carriers are thinking too. Tom, we're excited to have Responsive Technology Partners, is going to speak to what the threats are, what they're seeing. I'll let him introduce his organization in a second, and then best ways to help mitigate some of those risks. Before we get started, I think it is important to just have a quick introduction as to who UNITEL and Responsive is. Unico Group, the company I work for, was founded back in 1988. We're a regional player located in Nebraska. Some of the things that we're up on the screen, you'll see from an agency perspective, excuse me. We really walk and live our values that you see. So some of the things that we're not only recognized in the industry from an agency's perspective around best practices, but we're also recognized from the carriers that we work with and how we handle and do business. UNITEL itself is a division of Unico Group, which was established back in 2004. This business was really started back in the day of the ILEC world, and over the years has really morphed as technology services have changed, different verticals have sprung up. Today, we work with over 700 companies, really across the country. We may be regional in the Midwest, but really have national scope. Some of the exclusive partners we work with from an insurance perspective, we have a couple carriers that we are national directors for. We work direct with clients, and we also assist brokers throughout the country work with their clients to get them in the best situation. And then we also, as being an independent agency, work with multiple carriers. I think what's critical to maybe suggest with UNITEL is, not only, do we work at the state level, we also work with a lot of the national organizations. You probably see us through the various meetings that you attend, very involved at every level as we work with our clients and advising from a risk management perspective. And Tom, I'm going to hand it over to you for a couple minutes and let them know, let the audience know a little bit about Responsive Technology Partners, who you are and what you do.
All right, thanks, Mike. I'm Tom Glover with Responsive Technology Partners. We're a regional player also in the IT services space. At the heart of what we are is a service organization. We put our mission statement up here that, we're here to serve our customers, and we work with anything from small businesses to large enterprises in manufacturing, healthcare, local governments. And our goal is to always make each one of those customers feel like they're our only customer. I know it sounds kind of cheesy, but everything around our company, our culture is built on that platform of service and servant's heart, integrity, excellence, and innovation, our core values. Mike, if you'll go to the next slide. As I mentioned, we are a regional player. We have offices all down the eastern seaboard, from Virginia to the tip of Florida. We've been recognized by Inc. magazine for 2 years running in the Inc. 5000 list, and getting further in that list each time. And one of the unique distinctions we've got is last year we were the cybersecurity provider for the Super Bowl. So it was a really cool experience to work with the NFL and the FBI and Homeland Security and all these different groups to ensure that that annual football game went off without a glitch. We work a lot in the telco space. Our company is actually owned by 2 telcos, by Pineland Telephone Cooperative in Metter, Georgia, and by Wilkes Communication in Wilkesboro, North Carolina. So that's kind of at the root of our DNA, is working in that space and with other partners throughout the Southeast. All right, Mike, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, thanks, Tom. Yeah, we're excited with this, with what we're doing with this presentation. I think from the expertise that we have with Responsive, I think this is really, from our perspective, really touching through really all aspects that relates to cybersecurity and then how it impacts your business from an insurance perspective. But I want to take a minute and really touch on just kind of what the current landscape looks like. We all know the cyber claims are up. The ransomware, which we'll talk in a little more detail, some of the things that we're seeing, these average claims are up significantly. And which I think has really changed over the past couple of years is, ransomware attacks and, cyber threats in general, always thought to be a big business issue. And what statistics are now starting to show that a large percent of those claims are now hitting small businesses. And to put this all in perspective, I went back and looked at some of the stats that we had back in 2019, and what the FBI was suggesting that, the rough number for total estimated losses in the cyber world were approximately $3.5 billion. So we've seen such a significant increase in not only the sheer number of claims, the total losses, but just the frequency. And they're really coming at all angles, whether it's supply chain, remote DOS protocol, a number of items in this space continue to threat. The claims, as we mentioned, which really continues to trend, ransomware, which we talked about, but just the phishing aspect is still the critical component. And we'll speak to a little bit more detail around from insurance perspective, what they're looking for. 85% of what we're seeing from a claim perspective is still going to be hitting the human element aspect. And from a training, perspective, with a lot of businesses that we're seeing, it's, doing annual phishing tests really aren't adequate. We're seeing the requests from carriers and just internally from, IT. This is a heightened need to continue to train our employees on the importance of phishing and being aware. On the social engineering side, not only is ransomware, the claims, being the number one trending issue, but we're starting to see with a lot of the purchase orders, with all the infrastructure build that we're seeing in the industry, our clients in the telecom space, There's really two things we're seeing in the trend are going in the wrong direction is invoice manipulation, getting a hold of invoices, requesting payment from vendors, and then bank account information change. So these are still from, as it relates to all the training that we do from an accounting perspective, authentication, it continues to see the number of ransomware, social engineering claims skyrocket. When you look at a couple items I do want to highlight on this part, when you look at the carriers and how things are changing in this aspect, first party, when I look at the second bullet point, forms that we look at in the insurance world, there's really two aspects. In telecom, you really have your first party coverage, and that's really what you have to pay as an organization for any claims that do happen, right? So these are forensics, notification, anything, business interruption, anything that you're gonna be writing a check for. This is largely where claims are happening, but you also have the responsibility from a liability standpoint, your professional services. So when we speak to the insurance world, we're really speaking a couple different aspects. We're speaking third-party liability, we're thinking first party. And so in telecom space, this gets a little bit more complex, but today we're going to focus a lot around just kind of first party service and then the things that you need to be considering on that side. The carriers with the concern with risk, we are seeing upward rate pressure. You've all probably experienced this as you went through your renewals. It really started maybe when you start thinking back in 2020 when SolarWinds was kind of the big shock to the industry. Primarily, it started putting light on the MSP world and the challenges that presents. And then Casia hit, and there's been a number of others, the software vulnerabilities. But what this has really led to from an insurance carrier perspective is, one, there's been rate pressure, but there's also been carriers who just are not offering the same limits as to maybe what they were prior. And so what we're seeing, we're actually working on a case right now where a carrier is offering a $3 million limit in the cyberspace. We're having to go out to get excess limit. And what we're seeing is excess coverage above the primary is actually becoming more expensive. So the challenge is for what carriers are willing to offer their limits is, we're seeing pressure rate out on the upside. We're also seeing reduced limits in some cases. And then just the additional risk controls, the supplemental applications that many of you have been, as you work through renewals, and we'll speak a little bit more detail as we move forward. So what's the state of cyber insurance? I touched on capacity constraints with the number of claims. I think maybe going back 3 years ago, prior to the spike in the number of claims that we've seen, we just have not had the, from an underwriting perspective, maybe not pricing it correctly, maybe not understanding fully the risk, the size of claims that would happen. And so we are seeing capacity constraints in the insurance world, carriers understanding exactly what they want to insure, how much they want to take on. And that's really, from our perspective, put competition on the business level to really put yourself in the best light from a carrier's perspective as to secure the right type of coverage you need for your organization. The underwriting process, we'll talk a little bit more detail, my balance on that, and then just increasing rates. I think the number that we've seen that's held pretty steady is there was a big reset in 2021 where we saw rates in the cyber world from an insurance perspective up anywhere from 20% to over 100%, depending on what you were doing internally from a risk mitigation standpoint. We have seen that level a little bit, although statistics are showing rates are continuing to rise. The underwriting process, this has never been all that easy, but there's been a new component that we've had to work with as we've moved into underwriters looking for ways to better understand risk of organization, and that's third-party vendors. Many insurance carriers are utilizing vendors to do scans on your business, and they're using this, and it's not going to be it's not perfect, but understanding that when we look at how they're assessing risk, they're looking, it's going to be deeper, and they're not just doing it with their internal underwriting tools. The things that they're the criticals, I think that most people are asking, we try to stay in front of this on a quarterly basis with the folks that we insure and we advise on, is multi-factor authentication. This maybe, I would say 2-3 years ago, maybe 50% of our clients were doing it. Now it's, in order to secure insurance with any carrier, you must have some level of MFA within your business. Privileged access management. We are now seeing this lessen a little bit, to the extent of some insurance carriers are requesting MFA, not only at the entry level, but then at the privilege level. As carriers are getting more comfortable with MFA and understanding network segregation and how data is maybe air gap within networks, there's been a little bit of an understanding. There's lessening, I would say, of some of these protocols, but privileged access is still one of the criticals. And then remote desktop protocol backups is one that's not only just having backups, making sure they're tested on a routine basis, is throwing some of our clients loops as they work through renewals. And then phishing training. It used to be that, I'd say 2-3 years ago, as long as you had phishing training in place, it was fine. Now carriers are starting to request, as we heard on a call last week, that they may be moving to a monthly requirement for some level of phishing. Not all carriers are doing it, but we are seeing that on a frequency level increase. So with that, Tom, I'm going to hand it over to you if you want to speak to kind of what you're seeing at the MSP level, the current threats you're seeing that businesses are facing.
Yep. And Mike, I can echo kind of what you were going through on that previous slide. One of the services we offer with our customers is to help them through this renewal process. And I can tell you the questionnaires that we're getting are getting more and more detailed, and having more and more requirements that they're putting out there around to get this coverage added. As we kind of look at what we've seen in the past, and then what all the indicators are showing, for 2022 and beyond, email phishing attacks still tend to be the #1 way that we're seeing compromises in networks. A lot of things that we're doing at the cybersecurity level to try and help mitigate that, training being one of those pieces. But that continues to be the #1 attack vector that they're using to get in. The other one, and you mentioned 2 of the concerns around MSPs with SolarWinds and Kaseya, we're seeing more things happen in the software vulnerability space. Last year, we saw the Log4j vulnerability come out, which was a library that was used by just a ton of different applications that were out there, and that library created an exposure for all of those apps. We're still seeing that because some applications were old, they couldn't be patched. We couldn't just push out a patch to Log4j because that would break the app that was running it. SolarWinds Orion was kind of the first really big one that we saw, but everybody also gets all the alerts from Microsoft that there's this constant flow of vulnerabilities are being found in applications and patched in applications. Our browsers, our line of business apps, all of those are potential weak points and being exploited. And then the last one that we've personally seen a major uptick in are the supply chain attacks, where you may not be that first level that they're going after. What they're doing is going downstream, and they're compromising your partners, your customers, your vendors, and leveraging those people in your supply chain to then get to your organization, whether it be through social engineering and invoice manipulation or ACH transaction hijacking. Those are ones that we're seeing a lot of, and honestly, a lot of them are low-hanging fruit for the hackers. So I think they're going to continue kind of moving along that avenue. All right, go to the next slide. So with those kind of talking through these various ways that we're being attacked, how do you approach risk management? How do you defend yourself against this? And kind of the first bullet I've got here is you should take a risk-based approach. We have to be realistic. You're never going to be able to 100% mitigate every potential cybersecurity risk you've got in your organization. The most secure server is the one that's completely disconnected, sitting in a dark room, locked behind 4 locks, and nobody can get to it. But that's not reality. We're in a world where we're connected constantly, and we've got employees that have to access data. So with this risk-based approach, what we do is we look at all the potential risk to our organization, and then we prioritize those risks based on impact and probability. And then we implement strategies of how we can mitigate or reduce those risks. We look at business continuity. How do we continue operations when something happens? And then the final piece of that with the risk-based approach is look at how you minimize your overall losses. What are the business losses that we could have? How do we minimize that? How do we minimize our reputational damage? So what are the controls and pieces that we can put in place there? To do that, we look at developing a cyber risk management strategy. So what are the risks? How do I go through those? Looking at each element of your organization, how would this risk impact HR? How would it impact operations? How would it impact the finance department? Excuse me. And then through that process, you also identify where your critical assets are. That's one of the first questions we ask when we're going in working with the customers. What's the data you need to protect? Well, they're pretty quick at being able to tell you, oh yeah, I've got this, I've got customer data, I've got these patents that we've got this sensitive data on. Well, where does that live? Oh, I think it lives over here. And you start going through and you find out it lives over here and over there and all over the place. So, and part of that strategy, if you understand where that data is, and then we can start fortifying that data and then building our risk management strategies around that. A good way to implement those risk management strategies is to adopt a framework. There are a number of frameworks that are out there. The one that we've used the most comes from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, and it's their cybersecurity framework. And it's a fairly simple framework. Basically, it's built on 5 core activities, which are to identify your assets, the business context that the risk is going to be coming within, then protect it. Develop your safeguards that would take to ensure that that data or that asset is protected. Then it's the third point is, or activity is to detect. So put the pieces in place to be able to quickly detect when you have an event going on, and then have a response plan. So respond, to be able to quickly respond to any type of event that's going on, and then a recovery plan. So how do I recover once that happens? How do I keep business continuity? One of the things that we hear from a lot of customers is, well, I've got to be HIPAA compliant, or I've got to have this compliant. So I did that, I'm secure, I'm good. Compliance does not equal secure. Compliance, I look at that as kind of the baseline. That's the minimum you have to get to meet some type of regulatory compliance. But there's a lot of steps you need to go beyond just compliance in order to ensure that your organization is secure. We use a defense in depth approach. That's a term I've been using since early 2000s when I was working in the software development world, and we were writing software for payroll and for HR. And we looked at how do we build in defense and security within that application all the way from the ground up. And we should do the same thing in our organization. It's not enough to have a firewall and have antivirus. We also need to have zero trust. We need to have employee training. We need to do 2-factor authentication. All of these things that build this defensive layers of your organization, and that would be surrounding those critical assets that you need to protect. The next piece is developing metrics and using metrics. I like to refer to Pearson's law. Those things that are measured improve. those things that are measured and reported improve exponentially. So making metrics a core part of your reporting structure of the things that you look at on a daily basis, specifically around cybersecurity, is really important. And you're looking at things like how many days does it take to patch? That's helping develop the risk. What's my risk exposure there? If I've got alerts, is there a security operations center that's able to respond to that? How fast are they responding? How fast can I detect it? Things like that that just help us measure and continue to improve our security posture in the organization. And then the final point around risk management is testing. You know, I've seen so many organizations that develop these plans. They have a response plan, instant response plan. It's documented. Half the time it's documented on a computer, which if you get hit with ransomware is going to be encrypted, and you can't get to that plan. So having paper copies, doing tabletop exercises where you're walking through your response plan or your disaster recovery plan or your business continuity plan to make sure everybody on the team understands what their role is in the process, who's going to do what when, and just having that base understanding helps you to be more prepared when an incident happens, because they will. All of us will be hit at some point with some type of incidents. We'll go to the next one. So one of the things that we've worked with Mike and his team on is to put together an assessment that we're able to deliver. And that methodology we use for that assessment is really based off of using a combination of reports like BitSight is one that we've used. I think Mike was showing kind of one of the cyber scores from that. We use those industry standard reports combined with proprietary penetration and vulnerability testing, and then a stakeholder interview process where we're looking and talking to stakeholders within all levels of an organization to paint a really good picture of the processes, procedures, the data that's there, things that need to be protected, and then the general state of security within that. And then, Mike, if you'll do the next one. Those come together to create a cyber scorecard. And think of this as kind of a heat map of the organization. We're looking at 4 different aspects within the organization, or I'm sorry, 3 different aspects. Security infrastructure and kind of overall security posture, IT policies and procedures, and then IT operations. And those get measured based on the likelihood that a risk will impact you, and then the severity if it does. And that's where you kind of move from this green to red spectrum within that final output report. Mike, if you'll go to the next slide, I can, whoops, there you go. And within each one of those areas, we have a number of activities and data points that we're looking at. There's a total of about 33 controls that we're looking at and interviewing people on, assessing through the tools. And each of those roll up to create an overall score for each one of these 3 core areas. And from that, I think the next one, Mike, we've got the Cyber Management Index, which these are some of the processes that fit into that cyber infrastructure component. And this is just really an index of documenting what's in place, when it was reviewed, any notes on the findings of that.
And Tom, I would add on this from, just from as we kind of worked with carriers, one of the things that we found is with this market, when it really started heating up in 2000, it felt as if for as much as we tried to be in front from an industry standpoint, from a broker standpoint, is carriers were changing what the criteria was, what they were looking for. And it's one of those things that we felt it was critical to get a grip and be able to communicate not only at renewal time, but we're doing calls as frequent as quarterly with clients, just touching base as relates to what's kind of new. And really what you want to be thinking about as an organization is how you present yourself to the carrier, because we did touch on the capacity issues. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we kind of close. But what are you doing to secure best terms, best pricing, and not having to do it in the 11th hour? Because when you're doing it in the 11th hour, it typically the toothpaste is out of the tube already from a carrier's perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Just kind of looking through those overall data points, there's a lot there to do, and it is absolutely not something you can wait. Oh, I just got my checklist in. Let's go quickly implement these things. It just doesn't happen. You're not going to have that maturity that the carriers are looking for. So through this process, the output of all these activities is an in-depth cyber findings and the recommendations with it. So it's not just it's not a big sales process. That's not why we developed it. It was something to actually add value, to provide information back, in the form of, we found these, this particular issue, and here are the things that you need to go do in order to secure that part of the environment, in order to be able to answer this question properly, when you're going through your renewals, and most importantly, to be able to protect the data that's housed in this particular area. Then from this findings and recommendations report, the next step we go to is presenting also kind of a proposal. And Mike, if you want to jump to the next slide there, that just goes through, if we were to provide this, or most of the time at this point, we're working with an internal IT department or with business owners to share responsibility. And it's just, we give a way to help them kind of quickly leapfrog and move forward with getting their environment secured.
And just as we move into kind of the next point, the future trends, I think with that process, as we've worked with responsive, is really the comments Tom made, I think, are so impactful, as understanding where your risks are, what's critical to every business is going to be different. And I think from an executive standpoint, as you look for, what can you insure yourself, because insurance at the end of the day, it's about either you're transferring it to another party, i.e. the insurance carrier, or you're taking on some of that risk and self-insuring it. And I would say not all risk within cyber, as you all know, is created equal. And so I think it's that process of whether you're doing it internally with your IT team, or you're using some sort of outside managed service partner, is understanding really how you prioritize those, what's in where you need to invest capital, and working with the risk advisors at the insurance, at the carrier level, at the broker level, with your outside vendors, really getting a game plan that's just not built on a 1-year span, really looking out 3 to 5 year. And so what we're seeing, I think I'm gonna speak to the carrier perspective, is a lot of the insurance carriers are committed to this market, that now have kind of been through understanding how they're pricing the risk. We actually are seeing more support. One carrier, as an example, that we work with, they're doing quarterly scans. They'll send updates if there's any sort of software vulnerability to the client. So some of this, is going to be, there's companies that already have services in place, but it's just another set of eyes to make sure nothing falls through the cracks. So I think what we found with insurance carriers 3, 4, 5 years ago, they were right in the business. They weren't supporting it, maybe the same way as if you think about property risk control, right? Or liability on your business, where you had loss control visits, a lot of work done to try to minimize, business interruption, things of that nature. We're now seeing the insurance carriers are committed to this market, are investing capital to help support some of these things that you're doing internally from a risk mitigation standpoint. Some of the things, that we're seeing, the backups, Tom touched on a little bit, is just making sure These, the backups as you go through your disaster recovery. Are you testing? A lot of clients that we've worked with over the course of the past couple of years, they were backing up, they weren't testing, making sure they're encrypted and there's dual authentication, to access.
I'm sorry,
Go
one
ahead.
thing I'll add right there on the backups, one of the new pieces that I'm seeing now in the last few questionnaires that we've gotten is even going as far as to say that you need to have backups located in at least 3 locations, with one being cold storage. So it's getting deeper and deeper, and trying to push people to make sure that the backups are not only secured and tested, but they're stored in multiple locations. So if one location is compromised, then you've still got that restoration capability.
Thanks, Tom. And then the rate increases that we talked about, we still see them. We still anticipate. We do think it's going to be a little muted compared to what we saw back in 2000, late 2000, 2001. So I would, as you kind of think through from a budgeting perspective, you should continue to expect some level of rate increase, depending on where you are in the process of, getting your hands around some of the issues that are facing the industry. But what, was talking to a carrier that we work with some of our larger risk. One of the things that I think is coming back to this market is the increased appetite for high quality risk. And this is kind of the message that we've tried to get to our clients over the last 6 to 12 months is carriers are looking very differently around cyber insurance. There's been a number of carriers that have got out of the business altogether. They just didn't price it correctly. They didn't understand what they had. So some of them just completely backed away. There's a lot of carriers who were writing managed service providers who will not write managed service providers just to the risk as they're a conduit to enterprises. And so as we've kind of worked through this, the flow over the past 2 to 3 years, I think with the third parties that carriers are using to help underwrite, with the tighter controls they know the businesses are putting in place, I do think there's going to be an increased appetite from a carrier perspective as they cleaned up their books. And so from a business perspective, I think you can look at this as an opportunity set to secure really solid terms with carriers. If you do the right things along the way, a lot of things that Tom talked about, really having that strong narrative around what you do, how you do it, why you do it. Because I have a pretty strong sense that from what, even as we work through some of our renewals this year, we are seeing it easier to secure renewal terms, having addressed a lot of the issues that we talked about on that cyber index. Tom, anything you might want to add from what you're seeing from clients you work with?
No, I mean, I think that's absolutely correct. Those that have been proactive, they're addressing the risk early on. When we can go through and answer yes, yes, yes to these things, they are definitely able to get those renewals much easier now.
Okay. Just some of the takeaways. Not to beat the drum, but be proactive. Be in front of what's coming down the pipeline. I think from the executives that are on the call is, what starts at the top gets executed. And I think from what we see from the businesses that we work with that continue to move forward, grow revenue, secure contracts. The thing that we talked about a little bit from a contractual standpoint is those limits that are being required continue to rise as well. So as you grow your business, be proactive, continue to invest in the right things from a cybersecurity standpoint. Be open to ideas. I mean, one of the things, the key takeaway that I think a lot of our clients, it feels a lot more intrusive to go through a renewal process or securing this insurance. But from a business perspective, embracing that as an industry, everybody's just trying to get better, to secure our networks, our infrastructure. and that maybe to the second bullet point is just aligning, having plans that are aligning with your partners, and work with your risk advisor, understanding what carriers are really looking for. Third-party resources, what the process that we're really trying to get to with partners like Responsive is putting our clients in a better situation to win. And then just know that with every contract, I think the only thing I would highlight here is contracts today, they're being required upon you as you deal with, if you're going upstream or, enterprise clients, certainly, have them reviewed because some of the stuff can be negotiated away. We can help advise on, what you need to try to what battles you should win based on a pricing perspective, on how carriers are going to, depending on the limits. So certainly with those contracts, do check with risk advisors that you work with and get some guidance as it relates to, what battles you want to fight. And then just know the forms, the language within the forms, they are changing. For those that do the right things from a cybersecurity standpoint, there's going to be more flexibility. Those that tend to not make it as high a priority, there are going to be exclusions that start, popping into the cyber forms. Tom, anything from your comments that you might want to share with the group?
No, but we do have a question there.
Okay.
From Guy Benson. Said, for backups, how do you ensure the backup is free from invasion? Can't the same malware infecting your primary system also live in the backup? And that's a really good question, Guy. And I think there's two aspects to this, to the answer to it. One is how you ensure your backups don't get encrypted or destroyed, as part of an attack. And there are a number of different strategies for doing that. Most cloud backup systems have some safeguards built in where you can't access those. If you're doing an on-prem backup like Veeam backup or others, a lot of them now have an immutability setting on it where backups can be written, but they can't be changed. So even if someone compromises the system, they can't physically get to that data and make a change to it. As I mentioned, having it in multiple places and having cold storage. Cold storage it's offline. It's completely inaccessible. The other point being that, yes, you could have backed up malware. So just doing a straight restore from the backup does not ensure that you're not hit the next day. So when we've been called in to do remediation, we worked about a dozen cases last year with small to super large organizations where they were hit, and we did have to go back to backups. And the backups were restored in an offline manner to hardware. Then we scanned that hardware. We looked for all the indicators of compromise with it. And once we were ensured that that was clean, then we allowed it back on the network. That's really about the only way that you can ensure that you're not restoring data that's compromised. I think that was the only question. If there are any other questions, if you want to use the chat or the Q&A set area, we're happy to answer those.
Well, if there's no other questions, we certainly appreciate, once again, INCOMPAS for extending the invite to come on and speak and share with the group. And Julia, I think as a follow-up, our contact information will be attached out with the presentation. So if there's any questions that you want to ask of myself or Tom on a one-off basis, please feel free to reach out. We'll assist as best we can.